Thank you. The detective unlocks my tiny room and drags a plastic chair in from the hallway. Mr. Shunn, she says, I'd like to ask you some questions now, if you have a few minutes. I'm not going anywhere, I say, narrowing my eyes, my stinging eyes. There's no one but the detective and me in this consultation booth. No knob on the inside of the door. The detective locks us in, sits down, crosses her legs, and smooths her short skirt. I squirm in my chair. She's disconcertingly blonde. Mid-30s. I'm 19 years old, and I haven't been alone so close to a woman in 5 months. With no table between us, our knees nearly touch. This is against mission rules in so many ways I can't even count. She arranges a steno pad atop her bare thigh, pencil sharpened and poised. Should I call you, elder instead? I try to breathe easy and keep my eyes above her neck. Either way. Your name, please, elder. I'm confused. You used it a minute ago. For the record, her green eyes don't blink. Full name. I touch the spot on my sweater where the black name tag should have been. Donald William Shunn, II. Age? 19. Are you a Canadian citizen? No, I'm American. And you've been in Canada for how long? 5 months, about. Any previous criminal record? No. She takes sharp, efficient notes in shorthand, a skill I didn't know still existed. Okay, elder, she says, crossing her legs the other way. Let's talk about your activities today. I keep my eyes up. I've been through this already, with the constable at the airport. She shrugs. Now you're going through it with me. And you'll probably go through it with someone else after that. That's how these things go. I'd like to talk to my mission president. So would we, elder. We take terrorism very seriously. The word knocks the wind out of me. What? Terrorism, conspiracy. Conspiracy? There's no conspiracy. She taps her pencil against the pad. Imagine what it looks like from here. I'm going to prison. I'm going to prison, and I'm going to die there. I'm not a terrorist. The words grate in my throat. I already explained what happened. Explain it to me. Help me out here. We can't get any of your people on the phone. All we have is you. All you have is you. I close my eyes, trying to work my frozen lungs. How many times was Joseph Smith in scrapes like this? Plenty, and he got through it. Well, no, actually they shot him in the end. But I try not to think about that. I can get through this. Elder Shunn, tell me, says the detective. Tell me how you ended up here. My impulse is to blurt out everything. I take a deep breath. I choose my details with care. That was the prologue from my memoir, The Accidental Terrorist, Confessions of a Reluctant Missionary. The book tells the story of how, as a 19-year-old Mormon missionary in Canada, I came to be arrested and convicted for felony mischief. Before I talk a little bit about how the book came to be written and published, and read a couple more short excerpts though, I want to offer 2 disclaimers. First, though I'm no longer a practicing Mormon and have not been for more than 20 years, and though the book does delve into some controversial aspects of Mormon history, I'm not here either to critique or defend the faith, only to offer a small glimpse into the lives of its mysterious, clean-cut, wide-eyed young missionaries. Second, though you'll hear depictions today of certain criminal activities, I'm not here to glamorize, condone, or defend them. In other words, kids, don't try this stuff at home or at the airport. Now, why did I write The Accidental Terrorist? Well, fame and fortune, obviously. I mean, why else would anyone undertake the spectacularly self-destructive task of writing a book, especially one that ended up taking 17 years start to finish? Honestly, I started wanting to write about being a missionary almost as soon as I became a missionary. We probably all picture Mormon missionaries as an army of interchangeable young men in white shirts and ties, trudging endlessly from one porch to the next with a holy book and an urgent message from God. Even growing up Mormon, this was pretty much how I always envisioned mission life would be. Holy young men walking with the Holy Spirit, testifying boldly, and saving souls. It wasn't until I turned 19 and was pressed into service myself that I discovered a more colorful reality. The missionaries I met were anything but homogeneous, and frequently anything but holy. Some were diligent and some were slackers. Some were pious, sure, but more were profane. There was gossip and brown-nosing and backstabbing. A few of my colleagues seemed to be set on breaking every rule in our little white handbook, not to mention a commandment or two. I mean, they were, despite the black name tags, really just a bunch of teenage boys, with all that implies. Myself, I was something of a sheltered kid up to that point, having grown up in Utah in a large Mormon family. But I was also a budding science fiction writer. I'd attended the Clarion workshop in science fiction writing at Michigan State University the previous summer. So I was already planning on a writing career, and my reaction to the absurd reality of mission life was, inevitably, a powerful desire to write about it. This desire only intensified after the incident that got me arrested and expelled from Canada. Yes, that's my actual conviction record right there. I was only 19, but I now had two bizarre experiences under my belt that few people in the world could claim: Mormon mission service abroad and a hijacking trial. Either one would be interesting alone, but together, it seemed like gold to me. The potency of the combo came into sharper focus for me after I returned home from missionary service. My arrest had made the news not just in Canada, but in Utah too. Telling the story of how it had all gone down became my party trick. In any gathering, inevitably someone would tell someone else that I was the terrorist missionary, or someone would find out that I was no longer allowed into Canada, and people would crowd around and I'd have to tell the story again. I got pretty good at it, and at stretching or condensing the narrative to fit the attention span of the audience. I could do it in 5 or 10 minutes, or, as happened 2 or 3 times, I could go on for 2 hours or more and not lose anyone. I won't do that today. Now, my primary objective in the storytelling was simply to explain myself, which I think is something we all feel, and which is why this world of ours is so filled with books and blogs. For me, probably as a result of my upbringing, there's little worse than being misunderstood. So when someone would say to me, "You made a bomb threat? God, how stupid could you be?" I felt compelled to respond, "Yes, it was stupid, and I wouldn't do it again, but you have to understand the series of events that made it seem like a good choice at the time. The only possible choice." I did eventually start writing it all down, first as a series of posts on Genie in the early 90s. Remember Genie? Then as something of a serialized proto-blog on my website in 1995, where you can still find that version. And finally, in 1999, as a serious attempt to write the definitive, compassionate, and massive chronicle of the lives and culture of Mormon missionaries. Basically, the book I wish had existed for me to read when I was a teenager, before I went and became a missionary in the first place. I won't bore you with an account of the many drafts this book went through over the years, or the many near misses when one of my many literary agents was convinced we were close to getting an offer on the manuscript, or the screenplay version and the time it was optioned for one day, or the podcast that came out of it all in 2006, and which is also still available on my website. I'll just tell you about the day in 2014, after having waited 7 months to receive one final heartbreaking rejection on the manuscript, when my agent Barry Goldblatt sat me down and said, "Look, this is not advice I would normally give a client, but this is a good book, and we both know there's an audience for it, even if no one else can see that. It's time for you to get this out there and then move on. It's time for you to self-publish this book." My wife and I, my very patient and supportive wife, I might add, had already discussed that very strategy. So I was ready, or so I thought. If only I'd known what that would mean for the next 18 months of my life. Let me read you another short excerpt now, one of those behind-the-scenes glimpses of missionary life I've been talking about. This takes place in December 1986. I've been a missionary for about 3 months in the small prairie city of Brooks, Alberta, and though I don't realize it, I'm suffering from deep depression. Our job as missionaries is to proselytize for 70 hours a week. But my more experienced partner, Elder Dedman, all us kids were given the title elder, which is a story in itself, has no interest in that. Instead of knocking on doors, we've been hiking, bowling, shooting pool, watching television, reading books. In short, just about everything the missionary handbook forbids us from doing, short of going out on dates. I'm no fan of proselytizing myself, but on top of my homesickness and resentment, this blatant rule breaking has made me feel frustrated, sinful, isolated, and paranoid. Relations between me and the domineering Elder Dedman are tense in the extreme. Brother Alvarez, an assistant to the local Mormon bishop, has noticed this and asked Elder Dedman and me to participate in the Christmas program at church on Sunday. Him by giving a talk, me by performing a special musical number. Sunday morning, Dedman and I arrived at church 40 minutes before sacrament meeting. It was the earliest we'd been up in 2 weeks, and we were 2 big bundles of nerves. We both went straight to the dais. Dedman flung himself down in one of the choir seats and buried himself in his notes. I propped up the piano's lid, opened the fallboard, and arranged my sheet music. There were 7 or 8 people in the chapel already. Brother Alvarez reviewing his own notes in a seat behind the podium, the ward clerk arranging his roll books, a couple of younger teenage priesthood holders preparing the sacrament, and a scattering of early arrivals. But I figured I could get 2 run-throughs in while the place was still relatively empty. I sat, lifted my hands, and began the first arabesque. The music felt right from the start. Despite the complicated arpeggios, each finger knew exactly where to be at what time without my having to think, letting my hands roll up and down the keys as smoothly as if they were on wheels. And my heart rolled right along with them, buoyed by the river of notes, as light as it had been in weeks. So consumed was I by the music that I didn't notice Bishop Neuwirth standing at my shoulder until he spoke. "Is this what you're planning to play for us today, Elder?" He startled me so badly that I laid down a line of clams. I didn't turn to look at him as I tried to recover, an effort that took all my concentration. When I was back on track, I forced out a gruff affirmative. The bishop leaned in over my shoulder, peering at the sheet music and crowding my right arm. When exactly was this piece written? I huffed and stopped playing. 1888, I said frostily. The date was printed clearly beneath the title on the sheet music. 1888, Bishop Neuwirth repeated, shaking his head. No, I'm afraid that's not going to work. Stunned, I turned my head. Excuse me? The bishop rocked back, hands clasped behind his back. The Church General Handbook is very specific, he said casually. Except for certain church-approved pieces, musical numbers performed in sacrament meeting must be at least 100 years old. You'll have to play something else. I don't have anything else. A disconnected panic made my hands and my face tingle. This is what I've been practicing. Then play something from the hymn book, he suggested in a helpful tone. You can play hymns, right? I groped for words. I can accompany anything in the hymn book, but they're not good piano pieces on their own. Well then, I don't know what we're going to do. He sounded maddeningly reasonable. I've played this 100 times in church. No one's had a problem with it before. He folded his arms. If other bishops don't want to enforce the guidelines, that's their choice. But that's not the way we do things in this ward. I hated his fussy little mustache and his stupid tweed jacket. This piece of music is 98 years old. I could hear my voice growing shrill. I saw Brother Alvarez heading our way and Elder Dedman too. What, in 2 more years it magically stops being inappropriate? Bishop Neuwirth squinted at me in a manner entirely unlike Clint Eastwood. "Elder," he said even more quietly, "I won't allow my daughter to go on a date even one day before she turns 16. Why? Because that's the guideline the brethren have given us." "Excuse me, gentlemen," said Alvarez, laying a hand on the bishop's shoulder. "What seems to be the problem?" Bishop Neuwirth cleared his throat. If Alvarez wore his Mormonism like an elegant suit, then the bishop wore his like an accountant's green eye shade and sleeve garters. "I was just pointing out to the elder here that he can't play music under 100 years old." Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "Unless the bishop gives his approval." Bishop Neuwirth coughed a little. Well, yes, but I'm not familiar with this." He leaned over me and peered again at the sheet music. "Debussy." "Debussy," Alvarez said gently. "And to be honest with you, Bishop, I was quite looking forward to hearing this number in sacrament meeting. I find it entirely peaceful and reverent. Don't you agree?" The bishop nodded slowly, eyes narrowed. "So there won't be a problem if Elder Shunn plays this number?" "All right, yes, I suppose that'll be fine." Elder Dedman, on the other side of me, touched my elbow. "Smoke break?" he whispered. Fighting back tears, I nodded gratefully and stood up, shoving my hands into my pockets. "We'll be back in a few minutes," Dedman said, and I trailed him down the steps from the dais. When I looked back through a watery veil before exiting the chapel, Brother Alvarez was explaining something to the bishop quietly and furiously, very close to his ear. In the men's room, I wiped my eyes and tried to still the anger quivering in my hands. Elder Dedman watched me in the mirror with concern, an emotion I hadn't imagined was part of his repertoire. He handed me another dampened paper towel. "Are you going to be okay?" "Yeah, I think so." I plastered the cool towel to my forehead and squinted at myself. "Thanks." Dedman leaned back against one of the sinks, shaking his head. "Man, that guy's a jerk. I don't care if he is a bishop. He ought to get punched in the nose. Someone at least ought to give him a swirly. If he walked in here right now, I'd do it too." Picturing Dedman forcing the bishop's head down a toilet, I couldn't help but snort a little. I don't think he has enough hair." It'd work. He combs it over. He'd end up with this one long twist sticking up from over his ear. I laughed. "Can I be the one to flush?" "Be my guest." After another couple of minutes, I felt composed enough to return to the chapel. Leaving it, I'd only had a companion. Now, going back with Dedman's hand on my shoulder, I felt like I had an ally. And now we've reached the polemical portion of today's presentation. Don't worry, it probably won't hurt. Despite the fact that I've had more than 30 short stories published, note I said published, not self-published, and despite the fact that I've been shortlisted for the highest awards in science fiction, my most widely read work by far is undoubtedly my short essay on proper manuscript format for fiction writers. So many publications link to this page from their submission guidelines, in fact, that it has appeared at or near the top of searches for manuscript format and short story format for as long as Google has existed. By this, you might correctly divine that I am something of a stickler for doing things the right way. And that, in turn, is why I'm so often tempted to put an asterisk next to the self-published when I talk about the genesis of my book. It's true that self-publishing doesn't carry quite the stigma that it once did. After the success of books like The Celestine Prophecy, Wool, 50 Shades of Grey, and many others. In fact, this stigma itself is probably a fairly recent phenomenon, since authors from Lawrence Stern and Jane Austen to Marcel Proust and Virginia Woolf all self-published at one time or another. But it's also true that part of the rap on self-published books has to do with their perceived quality. And in many cases, that quality is not good. And I'm not talking about the words themselves here. I'm talking about the book as a physical or possibly even an electronic object. By way of analogy, I could make a perfectly functional chair by tipping an orange crate on its end and nailing on a couple of 2x4s for a back. You could sit on it, certainly, but it probably wouldn't be very comfortable, and you definitely wouldn't want to sink into it and stay there for several hours. Now, not to sound like Nick Offerman, but with some basic study and practice, you can probably make a pretty decent and reasonably comfortable chair in your wood shop. It may not be a Chippendale chair or an Eames chair, but at least you can build something that does its job without calling much attention to itself or causing any discomfort. It's the same thing with books. Yes, with all the print-on-demand services available today, it's easy to rip the final white-hot page of your manuscript from the typewriter, metaphorically speaking, of course, and send it straight to the printer. But how disappointing is it as a reader to receive a book you've been waiting excitedly for, only to discover that the lines are spaced too closely together to be read comfortably, that the font is a harsh sans serif, the paragraphs are printed in unindented blocks, or the margins aren't wide enough to give the eye any relief. That's not a book you want to fall into and spend hours with. Now, I probably don't have to sell this crowd on best practices, but I believe if you're going to go to the trouble to write and self-publish a book, you owe it to yourself and to your audience to educate yourself in the standards and tools of your trade. In my case, this meant learning that the golden ratio makes for the most pleasing dimensions of text on a page, learning what makes for comfortable line spacing, learning what fonts are considered best for extended reading, learning about kerning and optical margins, learning the meaning of verso and recto, learning where and when to use small caps, learning, in fact, that small caps are not just regular caps in a smaller font size, but are, in fact, proportioned differently. Are you beginning to see why this project consumed 18 months of my life? Basically, my goal was to produce a book that most readers could pick up and examine without realizing it was self-published. To do this, I had to understand that modern technology, while it could enable me to accomplish this, could not accomplish it in and of itself. I needed to educate myself in the craft of book design and typesetting if I was going to be able to make that technology do what I needed it to do. And here I should admit that Google probably deserved a mention in my book's acknowledgments, because who else was going to show me where to learn all this stuff? But the physical object was only part of the equation. The ebook editions needed to look good too, but it didn't take long for me to figure out that good-looking output was not a priority for any of the conversion services that take your Word document and spit you back an ebook file. I needed more control of the process than that. Now here I'm really going to grab for my geek cred. I read through the specs for EPUB and MOBI files. I wrote myself a Perl script that would parse the HTML file exported by WordPerfect. Yes, I still use WordPerfect. And I have since even before I was a developer there in the early 90s, to generate the 5 different flavors of ebook files that I needed for each of the 5 major vendors through which I planned to sell the book. Okay, that might have been a little over the top, even for me, but it was fun. These are just the production issues, though. None of this would have mattered without a manuscript that I was proud of and eager for people to read. But I didn't have that, not at first. I knew my book was long, ragged, and a little unfocused. That was fine in a serialized podcast where people hear a chapter a week over a long period of time. But that was not fine, not acceptable, in a book someone would sit down to read in a matter of days. Most problems related to this book I was able to solve for myself. Not this one. I'd been trying unsuccessfully to solve it for a decade and a half, and somehow I couldn't. So I did the only thing that made sense. I hired a professional editor, someone I trusted implicitly, to give my manuscript the same treatment it would have received at any big traditional publishing house. Or rather, probably better treatment. And that made all the difference. Part of managing a successful project is knowing what you can do yourself and what you need to outsource. Okay, this next excerpt picks up later the same day of the piano debacle, home at our apartment after dark. Elder Dedman jumped up from the armchair, suddenly all energy. Flip, Shunn, why are we sitting here talking? It's been a rotten day, this place is claustrophobic, and you could use some cheering up. I wasn't sure I wanted to be cheered up. What do you have in mind? He looked around the tiny apartment. Well, here it is almost Christmas and we're hardly in the spirit at all. Get your snow gear on. I think we need a tree. When we got in the car, I thought we might be heading to a tree farm or Canadian Tire, but Dedman drove us only 5 or 6 blocks before parking near the mouth of an alley. Where are we going? Shh, follow me. He turned off the overhead light, exited, and closed his door gently. I did the same. When he duck-walked down the alley like a suburban commando, I mimicked him as best I could. We kept to the muddy ruts torn in the blanket of snow by knobby winter tires. To our right, behind wooden fences, lay the backs of slumbering houses. To our left was a chain-link fence, and behind that a line of tall, shaggy spruces that bounded the grounds of a grade school. A bright gibbous moon had just risen. Deadman stopped far down the alley in a zone of relative darkness, away from any streetlights. Crouching in the weeds and dirty snow beside the chain-link fence, he whispered, "Hold it so it doesn't rattle." Hold what? In answer, he stood, latched onto the fence, and swarmed up it. The sound was like a million sleigh bells jingling. I quickly hooked my gloved fingers through the fence and strained to hold it taut. I expected lights to flick on any moment in the houses behind us, shotguns pumped and ready for a Santa Claus invasion. The fence was at least 8 feet tall. Deadman dropped lightly down the far side, landing in the pristine margin of snow between it and the closely spaced spruces. He motioned me up. "Your turn." I seized the fence with both hands, as high up as I could reach. My boots were too big to get a toehold in the links, but after half a minute of huffing and puffing and several queasy seconds of instability at the top, I made it over. I stood stock still as the rattling of the fence faded out, conscious of the clear night, the bright moonlight, and my own visibility. I turned toward my companion, but he had vanished. I pushed my way between the two nearest trees. Their lowest boughs overlapped, clutching at my legs. The scent of broken pine needles stung my nose. "Elder Deadman," I hissed as I emerged into the broad, ghostly schoolyard. A hand touched my shoulder. "Boo!" I yelped as Deadman materialized from the shadows beside me. He shushed me with a delighted grin on his face. "Keep it down, Shunn. You'll get us busted." "Then don't do that. What are we doing here anyway?" Deadman pointed at the spruce that had concealed him, which had to be 12 feet tall. "Getting a tree." "Oh, right, because that'll fit in our pit." He drew his hunting knife and raised it in front of my face. It gleamed in the moonlight, a wicked thing with toothy serrations on the spine of its 6-inch blade and a hilt wrapped in rawhide. Deadman, who always carried it when we hiked, called it his coyote sticker. "You just stand guard," he ordered. With that, he sheathed the knife and clambered into the tree. It was the platonic ideal of a Christmas tree. Its bushy boughs tapered in a perfect cone from the ground all the way to its apex. Had you draped it in tinsel and capped it with an angel, there'd have been no grander tree in town. Deadman wriggled in toward the trunk and picked his way up from there. About 3 feet from the top, his head popped suddenly into view. That's where he started sawing at the trunk with the knife's serrated spine. The loud rasp seemed to carry for miles. The teeth weren't made for cutting wood, and the job took forever. At one point, I spotted a distant police car prowling past the front of the school. "Cops!" I squealed, throwing myself flat in the snow and cursing the reflective strips on the back of my parka. The car never slowed, and Deadman resumed his work. After 10 minutes or so, I heard a resounding crack as Deadman snapped the trunk. I was so fixed on watching for trouble, the treetop nearly hit me as it shooshed to the ground. It sounded like wind in a wheat field. Hoisting 3 feet of heavy, prickly fur over the fence was no simple feat, but we managed it. As we hustled down the alley with our prize slung between us, I glanced back at the ugly gap in the tree line. It looked to me like we'd knocked someone's tooth out. As far as I know, by the way, unless the police in Brooks, Alberta have read my book, the murder of that tree remains unsolved to this day. Now let's come back to last summer. The book was almost done. Every piece was in place but one. I still needed a cover. We had no idea that what we were doing was really a cover shoot for my memoir. It was late summer, 1987. I was stationed with my assigned companion, Elder Bishop, in Bonners Ferry, Idaho. After my troubles in Canada, I'd been transferred back stateside, where I found myself living rent-free in a small house owned by a local Mormon farming family. The house was a couple of miles outside of town, in the middle of a vast swath of wheat fields. The Kootenai River meandered nearby. Occasionally a moose would wander by, or a bald eagle would sail overhead. I'd been there since May, so I'd gotten to watch much of the growing and harvest process. At the end of the season, the farmer let us know that they would soon be burning the stubble of one of the fields, which would lie fallow the next year. Even with advance warning, it was quite a shock when Bishop and I, returning home in the late afternoon from a day of proselytizing, spotted the smoke rising in the distance. Driving up the dirt road between the smoldering remnants of the fires was a surreal experience. It was so surreal, in fact, that we did exactly what you'd expect from bored kids. We pulled over, hopped out of the car, and gleefully snapped pictures of each other posing beside the flames. Decades passed, and though I didn't forget about the fire, I did forget about those photos. It was only after playing around with several different cover concepts for the book and finding them all wanting that I finally pulled out my box of old mission mementos and started sifting through it, looking for inspiration. And that's when I stumbled across this. Gold. I knew I'd found gold. I scanned the photo immediately and started working on a new cover. This image is so perfect, in my opinion, that looking back, it's hard not to feel like Elder Bishop and I, that day more than 28 years ago, were knowingly staging a cover shoot for my future memoir. It's eerie. And in a way, I believe it's true. I believe when he picked up that burning sheaf of wheat that my younger self had some inkling, or maybe some hope, of this book that might one day come. Now let me offer one last excerpt before I close. Between Christmas and New Year's, I had made a break for it. I tried to run away from my mission. I hopped on a bus bound for Calgary and then Salt Lake City, a journey of almost exactly 1,000 miles. But I only made it as far as Great Falls, Montana before a local church leader intercepted me and convinced me to give my mission another go. I was transferred from Brooks to Calgary, a much larger city where something like 40 missionaries were stationed, including a few female missionaries. My new companion, Elder Snow, was a diligent missionary who worked me hard, but we also spent plenty of time playing practical jokes on our nearby neighbors, Sister Roper and Sister Steed. In fact, the rivalry between our companionships was escalating to reckless levels. On the 1st of February, a Sunday evening, Elder Snow and I met the sisters at a fireside, an evening service featuring a couple of inspirational speakers held at a huge church building near the University of Calgary. Afterward, Roper and Steed invited us to meet back at their apartment for some hot chocolate. It was dark by then, and in the vast expanse of Calgary, we were miles from their pit. The sisters set off at a good clip in their red Cavalier, which I tried to keep in sight as we sped down the wide, unfamiliar streets. Our most recent humiliation at the sisters' hands may have been why I found myself racing to overtake them. It may be why Snow egged me on to drive faster and faster. Racing down one of Calgary's broad thoroughfares, I gunned the engine and pulled abreast of the red Cavalier. Roper and Steed taunted us with rude gestures and tried to shake us by peeling off into a maze-like neighborhood. Were we sublimating some instinct toward flirtation and courtship? Was this how Elder Fowler and Sister Nyland had found themselves on the wrong footing? A good 10 minutes later, Snow and I found ourselves stopped behind the sisters in a left turn lane a few blocks from their apartment. The light was red. "Red light, green light," Snow shouted. Giddily, I jammed the gear shift into park. Snow was already out his door. I pounded on Roper's window while Snow rousted Steed. "Red light, green light," we cried. "Red light, green light." Within moments, all four of us were running figure eights around the two cars, waving our arms and whooping it up. When the light turned green, Snow gave me a diabolical look and jerked his chin at the sister's car. I understood instantly. Without a word, the two of us hopped into their car, slammed the doors, and squealed away. Roper and Steed, in the few moments I could still see them in the rearview mirror, gaped after us. "Ha!" I shouted. "Take that!" 4 or 5 blocks later, we parked behind their apartment building and got out of the car to wait for them. We waited, and we waited, and we waited. We were pacing with worry, breath steaming in the cold night air when our blue Cavalier finally careened into the parking lot and screeched to a halt. Nearly 20 minutes had passed. The sisters, white-faced and breathless, scrambled out the doors and ran straight toward us. Sister Roper grabbed Snow by the lapels. "Oh, my Lord," she babbled. "Oh, my Lord, we're getting sent home. All of us, we're getting sent home for sure. Oh, I can't believe it. We're going to be in so much trouble. So much trouble." Hey, slow down," said Snow, extricating himself from her grip. "What the shaz happened?" "Oh, my word, it was a nightmare is what it is." "We got stopped by the police, thank you," said Sister Steed. I felt a stab of fear. The police? Snow folded his arms and drew himself erect. "What did you two do?" He was trying to project authority, but I could tell he was rattled. "What did we do?" said Roper, flapping her arms in dismay. "We took off after you, that's what we did. But there was this pedestrian crossing on the next block. I was all mixed up and the lights started flashing yellow, but it was too late for me to stop, so I went through the crosswalk. But there was a car behind us back of the red light, and it turned out to be a cop. And he flipped his lights right on and pulled us over." Snow was shaking his head. "Oh, Doper, you gotta be kidding. A pedestrian crossing? That is one serious ticket." "You're telling me," said Roper, her face a mask of desperation. "But it gets even better. When the cop asked to see my driver's license, guess where it was?" "Where?" I asked. "In your pit?" She whacked my shoulder. "No, you idiot. It was in my purse on the front seat of the car you were driving." I clapped a hand to my forehead. "Oh, no, Roper, I am so sorry." The look she gave me would have pulverized granite. "Tell me that tomorrow when I have to take my license down to the police station. I'll be lucky if I don't get arrested. I'm lucky I'm not in jail right now." "At least we had your registration," said Steed. "That helped. Of course, the officer took down the address, which is the mission office, so guess who's getting a visit from the police first thing in the morning?" "Oh, Shaz," Snow moaned, clutching his hair. "Like I told you," Roper said, "tomorrow that cop's going to tell President Tuttle I ran a light without a license in your car, and you think he's going to believe us when we say there's nothing funny going on? I'm telling you, we're all getting sent home." "My father's going to be so cheesed off," said Snow, eyes closed, fists clenched at his sides. "Flip, flip, flip." I couldn't stop shaking my head, seeing all my hard-won progress evaporate. What was wrong with me? Why did I always have to be so stupid? But at the same time, I felt the stirring of a tiny mutinous hope. Might we really get sent home? Roper and Steed exchanged a look. Their mouths trembled, and suddenly they both cracked up laughing. Steed doubled over, and Roper had to lean against her to keep from falling down. "Huh? Hey, what is this?" Snow demanded. "What the shaz is going on?" "Oh boy, elders," said Roper, pounding Steed on the shoulder. "We really had you going." Steed held her heaving stomach. "You ate it up, every bite. You two look so terrified I almost peed myself." "Wait, you didn't get pulled over?" "We did get pulled over," said Roper, wiping her eyes, "but we only got a warning. The cop said the fire drill was kind of cute, but when we ran the light, he had to make sure we weren't drunk." She and Steed dissolved in fresh peals of laughter. Pretty soon I was laughing too, and after a few minutes even Snow cooled down. Hot chocolate around the sisters' kitchen table went a long way toward repairing the breach. As we were rinsing our mugs, Sister Roper said to me in her most serious tone, "Don't you ever forget what we all been through, Elder Shunn. You need to write a book someday and put all this down for posterity. People need to know what it's really like to be missionaries and how we got through it. You hear me, Elder Shunn? I expect to see that book someday." I promised her she would, though I couldn't imagine how to write an honest book and still show my face at church. It was less than a month later that I'd find myself behind bars for real. No practical joke. Now, 29 years later, with the book actually here, it feels less like I've kept a promise to Sister Roper than that I've kept a promise to myself. Thanks for listening. And there's still several minutes left for questions if anyone has anything they'd like to ask. There's microphones at both sides of the room.
So it sounds like you went through a lot to figure out how to actually do the self-publishing like properly. Have you thought about, like, did you write about that or share that, or have you thought about going into business doing that possibly?
That's a really good idea. I've actually given some thought to offering workshops in creating ebooks. I haven't really written much about it yet, but I do plan to.
Oh, cool.
Very good idea. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for coming out. There's copies of the book available right over there on your way out. I really appreciate it. Thank you.